He was already freezing when he wrapped his coat around the girl, but then headlights cut through the trees, and the man stepping out wasn't a rescuer. It was her father, and the silence in his eyes said someone was about to die. The real question was, who? If this story pulled you in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. I've got another unforgettable story dropping tomorrow, and while you're here, jump into the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our community from all around the world. All right, let's get back into it. Zoe Munoz crashed through another ice-crusted branch, her breath coming in ragged clouds that vanished before they could comfort her. Behind her, maybe 30 yards, maybe less, boots crunched through powder with the methodical patience of men who knew their prey was dying. "Zoe," the voice cut through the trees. "Your daddy's waiting for you." Laughter followed. 3 distinct voices. 3 men who'd grabbed her outside the movie theater, who'd zip-tied her wrists until she bled through the plastic, who'd argued about ransom amounts while she pretended to be unconscious in their back seat. She'd escaped when their vehicle hit black ice and spun into a ditch. 30 seconds of chaos. That's all she'd needed. Now her legs were concrete. Her cheerleading uniform, burgundy and white with bold stripes across the chest, chosen because it looked good under gym lights, not because it could save her life, clung to her skin like frozen paper. The snow had soaked through her white sneakers 2 miles back. Her dark hair, usually pulled into a neat ponytail, hung in wet tangles around her pale face. She collapsed against a pine tree, bark scraping her bare shoulders. The thin jacket she'd stolen from the crashed vehicle wasn't enough. Nothing close to enough. "This is where I die," she thought distantly. Against some random tree, in some random forest. That's when the shadow moved. Zoe's head snapped up, and through the curtain of falling snow, a figure emerged, young, maybe her age, lean but solid, moving with the kind of confidence that came from knowing exactly where you were, even in a whiteout. He wore dark jeans and a burgundy t-shirt beneath an olive green winter coat, practical gear that locals bought for survival, not fashion. Caleb Scott stopped 6 feet away, his brown hair already dusted with snow, his sharp features assessing her with the precision of someone trained to evaluate damage. His expression was controlled, unreadable, but his eyes moved quickly, taking in her bleeding wrists, her inadequate clothing, the blue tint spreading across her lips. "You hurt?" His voice was low, steady, cutting through the wind. "I'm fine." The lie came automatically, even as her body convulsed with shivers so violent she could barely hold herself upright. Caleb's jaw tightened. "You're hypothermic." His hands moved to his coat, thick, insulated, olive green canvas reinforced at the shoulders. The kind that cost 3 paychecks. The kind that kept you alive when the temperature dropped to single digits. "What are you, no?" Zoe tried to straighten, but her muscles refused the command. Caleb pulled the coat off in one smooth motion and wrapped it around her shoulders before she could finish protesting. The warmth hit her like a wall. It smelled like pine smoke and cold air and something else, safety, maybe, or just the absence of immediate death. "I can't take this. You'll freeze." She tried pushing it back with hands that barely functioned, but Caleb was already stepping away, his burgundy shirt already darkening with moisture as snow melted against the fabric. The cold seemed to hit him, but he didn't flinch, didn't reach to take the coat back. "I know these woods." He crouched beside her, his movements deliberate. "You don't." That's when Zoe noticed her phone cracked screen, battery dying, lying in the snow where she'd dropped it. Caleb picked it up carefully, wiped the snow away with his thumb, and held it out to her. "Who should I call?" Zoe's vision blurred. The question felt impossibly complicated. Her fingers wouldn't work properly to take the phone. She tried to speak, but her teeth were chattering too hard. Caleb made the decision for her. He unlocked the phone. She must have left it open when she dropped it and scrolled through her contacts. His expression shifted when he found what he was looking for. Just barely, just enough to notice. "Sebastian, Dad." "That's..." Zoe's voice cracked. "You can't. He needs to know you're alive." Caleb's tone left no room for argument. "You don't understand." She grabbed his wrist with what little strength remained, her fingers like ice against his skin. "My father, you'll get involved in something. I'm already involved." Caleb met her eyes, and there was something in his gaze that made her believe him. Not recklessness, not bravery, just simple, stubborn certainty. "Besides, you have maybe 10 minutes before your core temperature drops past the point where I can help you. So yeah, I'm calling him." Behind them, distant voices echoed through the trees. The men were still hunting. Caleb heard them too. His posture changed subtly, his body angling between Zoe and the sound, his free hand moving to his belt where Zoe realized with distant surprise a hunting knife rested in a worn leather sheath. "How many?" he asked quietly. "3. He nodded, processing, then pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice, then a voice answered, calm, dangerously calm, the kind of calm that came from men who'd learned not to panic, because panic meant weakness. "Zoe?" Caleb looked at the girl wrapped in his coat, barely conscious, mascara frozen in black streaks down her pale cheeks, and made his choice. "Mr. Munoz, my name is Caleb Scott. Your daughter is alive, but she's hurt. She's hypothermic, possibly in shock, and there are men hunting her through the forest. I need you to listen carefully." Silence on the other end. Not empty silence, the kind filled with controlled fury and instant calculation. "Where?" Not a question. A command. Caleb gave precise coordinates, reading them from a GPS watch on his wrist. "North Ridge access, about 3 miles in from Highway 7. We're near the old fire lookout trail. I'll keep her warm until you arrive." The men following her. 3 of them. Maybe half a mile behind us. They're moving slower now. Probably think she's already done. Another pause. "Keep my daughter alive, Caleb Scott." "I intend to." The line went dead. Zoe was staring at him, her hazel eyes wide with something between terror and disbelief. "You just do you even know who?" "Doesn't matter." Caleb pocketed the phone and adjusted the coat around her shoulders, tucking it more securely. "Can you walk?" She shook her head. "Then we wait." He settled beside her, his back against the tree, positioning himself so he could watch the direction the voices had come from. His burgundy shirt was already soaked through, and Zoe could see him starting to shiver, but his hands remained steady. "You're freezing," she whispered. "I'll live." He glanced at her, something almost like a smile crossing his face. "You wouldn't have." The snow kept falling, the voices kept getting closer, and somewhere in the darkness, engines were already roaring toward them. Caleb counted seconds in his head while watching the tree line. 43 since the call ended. Sebastian Munoz had said nothing about how long it would take to reach them, but Caleb knew these roads. Even driving like hell, it would be 15 minutes minimum, maybe 20 in this storm. The voices behind them had gone quiet. That bothered him more than the shouting. Beside him, Zoe was fading. Her shivers had become sporadic. Irregular, a bad sign. The body stopped shivering when it started shutting down, redirecting what little warmth remained to vital organs. Caleb had seen it happen to a hiker once, back when he was 14 and helping with search and rescue. The man had been smiling when they found him, talking about how warm he felt, how he just needed to rest. He'd died 30 minutes later. "Hey." Caleb touched Zoe's shoulder gently. "Stay with me. Tell me what happened." "Tired," she mumbled, her eyes drifting closed. "I know, but you don't get to sleep yet." He kept his voice firm, commanding. "How did they grab you?" Zoe's eyes opened slowly, focusing on him with effort. "Movie theater. I was. Waiting for my friend. She was late." Her words came out slurred, dreamlike. "Black Fawn. 2 men. They just grabbed me. Zip ties." She held up her wrists. The plastic restraints had cut deep before she'd broken free, leaving raw wounds that had bled and then frozen. Caleb felt something cold settle in his chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. "How'd you get away?" "Driver hit ice. We crashed." A ghost of a smile crossed her blue-tinted lips. "He forgot to lock the child safety locks. I kicked the door open and ran." "Smart. Not smart enough." Her head lolled against the tree. "Should have stayed on the road, flagged down a car. But I just ran. Into the trees. Kept running." Caleb understood. Panic made you do stupid things. Made you run toward death thinking you were running toward safety. But he didn't say that. "You're alive," he said instead. "That's what matters. For now." Zoe's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "They'll find us. They're still out there. Let them." She looked at him then. Really looked at him, seeing him clearly for the first time through the fog of hypothermia. Caleb wasn't big lean, maybe 5'10", more runner than fighter, but there was something in the way he held himself that suggested he'd grown up in places where weakness got you killed. "You can't fight 3 men," Zoe said. "Don't have to fight them. Just have to keep them away from you until your father arrives." Caleb's hand rested casually near his knife. "How long were you with them?" "Maybe 2 hours. They kept arguing about..." She stopped, her face crumpling. "About how much I was worth. About what my father would pay to get me back. They knew who I was. They knew exactly who I was." Tears froze on her cheeks before they could fall. Caleb watched her struggle with the reality of it, the fact that she'd been targeted, hunted, reduced to a price tag in someone else's negotiation. "Did they hurt you?" he asked quietly. "Besides the zip ties." Zoe shook her head. "They were waiting. Said my father needed to see me, intact, for proof of life." She laughed, a broken sound. "Guess they were saving the bad stuff for later." Caleb's jaw tightened. "They won't get the chance." "You don't know that." "Yeah, I do." Something in his certainty made Zoe study him more carefully. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." "Don't need to know you. Most people would have kept walking, wouldn't want to get involved." "I'm not most people." "No kidding." Zoe pulled his coat tighter around herself, and Caleb noticed how her hands had stopped shaking. Not because she was warming up, because her body was giving up on temperature regulation entirely. "You go to my school?" "Different school. County line." Caleb shifted position, angling his body to block the wind. "I've seen you around, though. You're on the cheerleading squad." "Was." She looked down at her burgundy and white uniform, now stained with blood and dirt and snow. "Don't think they'll want me back after this." "Why not?" "Because," her voice broke, "because everyone will know that I got grabbed, that I was stupid enough to get taken, that I—" "Stop." Caleb's voice cut through her spiral. "You didn't do anything wrong. They did. Remember that." Zoe stared at him, tears spilling over again. "You sound like you know. My sister." The words came out flat, emotionless. Different situation. Same blame game. Caleb didn't elaborate, and Zoe didn't push. The wind shifted, carrying voices with it. Closer now, maybe a quarter mile. Caleb stood in one smooth motion, his hand moving to his knife. "How many saw your face clearly?" "All 3. They say any names?" "Just. Called each other bro, mostly." "Wait." Zoe's eyes widened. "One of them. The driver. The others called him Ricky. He had a tattoo on his neck. Some kind of bird." Caleb filed the information away. It wouldn't matter soon. Sebastian Munoz would have resources Caleb couldn't imagine, but it felt important to remember anyway. "Zoe." He crouched beside her again. "When your father gets here, there's going to be questions. About me. About what I did. You tell him the truth. Understand? Don't make it sound like more than it was. You gave me your coat in a blizzard. That's what anyone should do." Caleb's eyes met hers. "Your father seems like the kind of man who pays debts." "I don't want a debt. I just want you to be okay." Before Zoe could respond, headlights cut through the trees. Multiple vehicles, moving fast, their engines growling through the storm like mechanical wolves. Caleb helped Zoe to her feet, supporting her weight as her legs threatened to buckle. She clung to him, her fingers digging into his arm, his coat still wrapped around her shoulders like armor. "It's going to be okay," he said softly. Behind them, the voices stopped. The men hunting her had seen the lights too, and somewhere in the darkness between predator and prey, everything was about to change. The first vehicle broke through the tree line like a predator emerging from shadow, a black SUV with tinted windows and enough ground clearance to make the snow look irrelevant. Then another, then 3 more, fanning out in a tactical formation that suggested military training or something close to it. Caleb felt Zoe tense against him. "It's okay," he murmured, though he wasn't entirely sure it was. The vehicles stopped in a semicircle, engines still running, headlights creating a harsh white perimeter that turned the falling snow into static. For 10 seconds, nothing moved, just wind and idling engines and the sound of Zoe's ragged breathing. Then doors opened. Men emerged, 5, 6, 7 dressed in dark tactical gear that looked expensive and functional. They moved with synchronized precision, weapons held low but ready, spreading out to secure the perimeter. These weren't thugs, these were professionals. The last door opened, and Sebastian Munoz stepped out. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with the kind of presence that made you notice him even in a crowd. Dark hair graying at the temples, sharp suit under a long black coat that should have looked out of place in a winter forest but somehow didn't. His face was angular, controlled, carved from stone and discipline, but his eyes dark brown, almost black in the harsh light, went straight to his daughter, with an intensity that made Caleb take an instinctive step back. "Papa," Zoe's voice broke. Sebastian crossed the distance between them in 4 long strides, his expression never changing, his movements measured despite what had to be crushing relief. He stopped a foot away, his eyes scanning Zoe from head to toe, cataloging every injury, every frozen tear track. Every sign of trauma, with the precision of someone who'd seen violence before and knew exactly what it looked like. "Mija," he said softly, and that single word carried more weight than any speech could. Zoe collapsed forward into his arms, and Sebastian caught her, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other securing her against his chest. His jaw clenched, the only crack in his composure, and for 3 seconds, he just held her, his eyes closed, his breathing carefully controlled. When he opened his eyes again, they locked onto Caleb. Caleb stood his ground, arms wrapped around himself now that his coat was gone, his burgundy shirt soaked through and clinging to his frame. He was shaking had been for the last 5 minutes, but he kept his spine straight and met Sebastian's gaze without flinching. "You're Caleb Scott." Not a question. "Yes, sir." Sebastian's eyes moved to the olive green coat wrapped around Zoe, then back to Caleb's face. "How long has she had your coat?" "About 20 minutes. How long before that was she exposed?" "Don't know exactly. She said she ran for a while after escaping. Maybe an hour. Maybe more." Sebastian's expression darkened fractionally. He looked down at Zoe, who was barely conscious now, her face pressed against his chest. "Get the medical kit," he said without raising his voice. One of the men moved immediately, returning with a hard-shell case that opened to reveal equipment that looked more emergency room than first aid. Another man produced thermal blankets, the kind that reflected body heat. "We need to get her warm slowly," Caleb said, then immediately regretted speaking. These people clearly knew what they were doing, but Sebastian nodded. "You know hypothermia protocol. Enough to keep her alive until you got here. More than enough." Sebastian carefully transferred Zoe to 2 of his men, who began wrapping her in the thermal blankets with practiced efficiency. "Get her in the heated vehicle. Monitor her vitals. If anything changes, you call immediately." "Yes, sir." They moved Zoe toward the nearest SUV, and she looked back over her shoulder, her eyes finding Caleb through the snow. "Don't," she started, but her father touched her face gently. "He'll be fine, Mija. I promise." The door closed, and suddenly Caleb was alone with Sebastian Munoz and 6 armed men in the middle of a frozen forest. The wind cut through his wet shirt like knives, and he realized distantly that his hands had gone numb. Sebastian noticed. Of course he noticed. "How long have you been without your coat?" "Same as her. 20 minutes. "You're hypothermic too." "I'll manage." That wasn't a question. Sebastian gestured, and immediately one of his men moved forward with another thermal blanket. Caleb wanted to refuse, wanted to prove he was fine, but his body had other ideas. He took the blanket gratefully, wrapping it around his shoulders. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet." Sebastian's tone was neutral, unreadable. "Tell me exactly what happened." "Everything." So Caleb did. He kept it factual, clinical, walking Sebastian through finding Zoe, assessing her condition, making the call. He mentioned the 3 men hunting her, the zip ties, the kidnapping from the movie theater. He described her escape from the crashed vehicle, her run through the forest, her deteriorating condition. He left nothing out. When he finished, Sebastian was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on something in the distance. Then, "You gave her your coat immediately. She was dying. You called me instead of 911. She said you were her father. Seemed like you'd want to know first. You stayed with her despite knowing men with weapons were hunting her." Caleb didn't respond. What was there to say? Sebastian turned to face him fully, and Caleb saw something shift in those dark eyes. Not warmth, exactly, but a kind of recognition. Respect, maybe, or assessment. "Do you know who I am, Caleb Scott?" "I know your name, sir." "That's not what I asked." Caleb met his gaze steadily. "I know enough to understand that calling you was either the smartest thing I've ever done, or the dumbest. Haven't decided which yet." One of the armed men made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Sebastian's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes that could have been amusement. "You have family? People who'll worry if you don't come home?" "My uncle. But he knows I check the trap lines. Won't expect me back for another hour." "Good." Sebastian pulled out his phone. "Because we're not finished here." He pressed a button, and somewhere in the darkness behind them, men began screaming. The screams cut off as quickly as they'd started. Caleb's head snapped toward the sound, every muscle in his body tensing despite the cold that had seeped into his bones. Through the trees, maybe 200 yards back, flashlight beams scattered wildly, then disappeared one by one like candles being snuffed out. "How many men do you have out there?" Caleb asked quietly. "Enough." Sebastian didn't look away from his phone, his thumb moving across the screen with casual efficiency. The 3 who took my daughter are currently being detained. Detained. The word hung in the frozen air like a threat. One of Sebastian's men approached, older than the others, maybe 40, with a scar running through his left eyebrow. Sir, we have all 3. Ricky Hernandez, James Cook, and Tyler Bennett. They're secure. Injuries. Hernandez has a broken nose. Cook dislocated his shoulder trying to run. Bennett came quietly. Smart man. Sebastian finally looked up from his phone, his expression unchanged. Bring Hernandez here first. I want to see the man who put his hands on my daughter. The scarred man nodded and disappeared back into the darkness. Caleb felt his stomach tighten. He'd grown up hearing stories about men like Sebastian Munoz, men who operated outside the law, who settled debts with violence, who made people disappear, but hearing stories and standing in the middle of one were very different things. Mr. Munoz. Sebastian. The correction was gentle but firm. You saved my daughter's life. You've earned the right to use my name. Sebastian. Caleb amended. What are you going to do to them? That depends on what they tell me. Sebastian's eyes met his, and there was something ancient in that gaze, something that understood violence not as chaos but as tool, as language, as currency. Does that bother you? Caleb thought about Zoe's bleeding wrists, about the way she'd shaken when she described being grabbed, about how close she'd come to dying alone in the snow while men laughed about her price tag. No, he said honestly. It doesn't. Good. Then you'll understand why I want you to stay. Why? Because when this is over, there will be questions. Police, maybe. Federal agents if these idiots cross state lines. Lawyers, definitely. Sebastian tucked his phone away. You're the only witness who isn't on my payroll. Your testimony, if needed, carries weight that mine never will. Caleb understood what wasn't being said. You're my insurance. My proof that this was rescue, not murder. And if I say no, then one of my men drives you home, and we never speak again. Sebastian's tone made it clear the offer was genuine. But you strike me as someone who finishes what he starts. Before Caleb could respond, movement in the trees announced the return of Sebastian's men. They emerged, dragging a figure between them, mid-20s, stocky, with a bird tattoo on his neck, and blood streaming from his clearly broken nose. Ricky Hernandez. They forced him to his knees 15 feet from where Sebastian stood. Ricky's eyes darted between the armed men, the vehicles, and finally locked onto Sebastian with the desperate calculation of someone who just realized exactly how badly he'd miscalculated. Mr. Munoz, sir, this is a mistake we didn't know. You knew. Sebastian's voice could have frozen water. You knew her name. You knew who her father was. That's why you took her. It wasn't my idea. I just drove. I swear you just grabbed a 16-year-old girl outside a movie theater. You just zip-tied her wrists until she bled. You just discussed her value like she was merchandise. Sebastian took 3 steps forward, and Ricky flinched back so hard the men holding him had to adjust their grip. Tell me, Ricky Hernandez, who hired you? I can't, he'll kill me. Sebastian smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Caleb had ever seen. So you do know who hired you? Ricky's face crumpled. Blood and snot ran down his chin as he started crying ugly, desperate sobs. Please, I have a kid, I needed the money. You have a daughter. Sebastian's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Emily Hernandez, 7 years old, lives with her mother in Riverside. He crouched down, bringing himself eye level with the sobbing man. Did you think about her when you grabbed mine? The question hung in the air like an executioner's blade. Caleb watched Sebastian's face and saw something that made his blood run colder than the storm ever could not rage. Not fury, but perfect, crystalline control. This was a man who'd made terrible decisions before. A man who knew exactly what he was capable of. I'll tell you everything, Ricky gasped. Everything. Just please don't hurt my little girl. She didn't do anything wrong. No, Sebastian agreed. She didn't. Neither did mine. He stood, brushing snow from his coat. You have 60 seconds to give me a name, a location, and a reason why I shouldn't leave you in these woods for the cold to finish. Ricky talked. The words tumbled out in a desperate flood, names, addresses, phone numbers, descriptions. A businessman from Seattle who wanted leverage against Sebastian for some deal gone wrong. A warehouse where they were supposed to take Zoe. A payment schedule. Everything. Sebastian listened without interrupting, his expression never changing, while one of his men recorded everything on a phone. When Ricky finally ran out of words, Sebastian looked at the scarred man. Verify what he said. If it's true, he lives. If he lied, he doesn't. Yes, sir. They dragged Ricky away, still sobbing. Sebastian turned back to Caleb, and for the first time since arriving, he looked tired. Not physically, but the kind of tired that came from carrying weight no one else could see. "You think I'm a monster," he said. It wasn't a question. "I think you're a father," Caleb replied. Something shifted in Sebastian's expression. Not softness, men like him didn't do soft, but acknowledgement. Understanding. "Come," he said, gesturing toward the vehicles. "Let's get you warm." And then, he paused, his eyes moving to where Zoe waited in the heated SUV. "Then I need to know everything about the boy who saved my daughter's life." Caleb followed, his legs unsteady, his body finally admitting how close he'd come to his own kind of collapse. Behind them, the forest swallowed the last of the screams. The interior of the SUV hit Caleb like a physical force, heat pouring from the vents, leather seats that probably cost more than his uncle's truck, and the subtle scent of expensive cologne mixed with gun oil. He sank into the seat across from Sebastian, the thermal blanket still wrapped around his shoulders, and felt his body finally begin the painful process of warming up. His fingers burned, his toes screamed, his chest ached with every breath. "Worth it," he thought, looking through the tinted window toward the vehicle where Zoe was being treated. Sebastian followed his gaze. "She's stable, heart rate elevated but steady. Core temperature is rising. The medic says she'll be fine." He paused. "Because of you. I just gave her my coat. You gave her more than that." Sebastian leaned back, his dark eyes studying Caleb with the same intensity he'd probably used to build whatever empire he ran. "You gave her time. Hope. A reason to stay conscious long enough for help to arrive. Don't diminish what you did." Caleb didn't know how to respond to that, so he said nothing. The scarred man appeared at the window, tapping twice. Sebastian lowered it halfway. "Hernandez's information checks out. Derek Paulson, Seattle businessman, has been trying to pressure you on the waterfront development deal. The warehouse exists. We found the van they used stolen plates, but the VIN matches a vehicle reported missing 3 days ago. And the other two? Cook confirms everything Hernandez said. Bennett's claiming he didn't know who the target was, says he thought it was just a pickup job." The scarred man's tone made clear what he thought of that excuse. Sebastian was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming once against his knee. "Take them to the secondary location. I'll deal with them after I know Zoe is safe. And Paulson? I'll handle him personally." The words were soft, almost gentle, which somehow made them more terrifying. "Make sure our friend in Seattle knows I'm coming." The window rose, sealing them back into heated silence. Caleb's hands had started shaking, not from cold anymore, but from the adrenaline finally catching up. He'd been running on pure survival instinct for the last half hour. Now that Zoe was safe, now that Sebastian had arrived, his body was remembering how close everything had come to going very differently. "You're crashing," Sebastian observed. "It's normal. The body can only sustain emergency response for so long. I'm fine. You're hypothermic, probably mildly dehydrated. And you've been standing in sub-zero temperatures in a wet shirt for 20 minutes. Sebastian reached into a compartment and pulled out a bottle of water and what looked like an energy bar. "Eat. Drink. Your body needs fuel to warm itself." Caleb took them, his hands fumbling with the wrapper. The first bite tasted like cardboard, but he forced it down anyway. "Tell me about yourself, Caleb Scott." Sebastian's tone shifted, becoming almost conversational. 16? 17? 17. Senior at Pinewood High. "And you live near here?" "About 4 miles west. My uncle owns property backing up to state forest land. I help him maintain it." Caleb took a sip of water, feeling it burn all the way down his cold, shocked throat. "Check trap lines, monitor for poachers, that kind of thing. So you know these woods. Better than most. That's why you knew how to find shelter. How to assess Zoe's condition. How to keep her alive." Sebastian's eyes never left Caleb's face. "You've had training. Search and rescue?" "Some, when I was younger. My uncle used to volunteer with the county SAR team. I went along, learned the basics." Caleb met his gaze. Enough to know that people die in conditions like tonight. Fast. But not her. There was weight in those words, gratitude. Yes, but also something else. Something that felt like an oath. Because you didn't hesitate, didn't calculate the risk, didn't worry about the cost. She was dying. Nothing else mattered. Everything else mattered. You could have walked away, called 911 and kept going. Left her there with your coat and let professionals handle it. Sebastian leaned forward slightly, but you stayed. Exposed yourself to the same danger that was killing her. Made yourself vulnerable to the men hunting her. Why? Caleb thought about his sister. About the night she'd come home bleeding, crying, refusing to tell anyone what happened because she was afraid they'd blame her. About how their uncle had sat with her, hadn't asked questions, just stayed until she was ready to talk. Because someone should have, he said quietly. And I was there. Sebastian studied him for another long moment, then nodded slowly. You have principles, real ones, not the kind people claim to have when it's convenient. He sat back. That's rare, especially in someone your age. I'm not special. You're wrong. Sebastian's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and something in his expression softened fractionally. Zoe's asking for you. What? She wants to make sure you're okay. He paused, choosing his words carefully. She's feeling guilty. About the coat. About putting you in danger. My daughter has a strong sense of responsibility, even when things aren't her fault. She didn't put me in danger. They did. Tell her that. Sebastian opened the door, and the cold rushed in like a living thing. Come. But first, he shrugged off his own coat, a heavy black wool that probably cost more than Caleb's entire wardrobe, and held it out. You can't see her looking like you're about to die yourself. Caleb wanted to refuse, but his body had other ideas. He dropped the thermal blanket and pulled on the coat. It was too big, hanging past his hands, but it was warm and dry and lined with something that felt like silk. Thank you. Thank me by making sure my daughter stops blaming herself for surviving. Sebastian stepped out into the snow. And Caleb, when we're done here, you and I are going to have a longer conversation. About debts. And what I do for people who save my family. They crossed the distance to the other SUV, and Sebastian opened the door. Zoe was sitting up now, wrapped in thermal blankets, an IV line running into her arm. Her dark hair was still damp, her face still pale, but her eyes were alert. They locked onto Caleb immediately. You're okay, she breathed. So are you. And then, to Caleb's complete surprise, Zoe started crying again, not from fear this time, but from relief so powerful it broke through every defense she had left. Sebastian gave them 3 minutes alone. Caleb sat on the edge of the seat, careful not to disturb the medical equipment surrounding Zoe, while she wiped at her face with hands that still trembled slightly. The medic, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and efficient movements, had stepped outside to give them privacy, though Caleb suspected she hadn't gone far. I'm sorry, Zoe said, her voice rough. I keep crying. I'm not usually like this. You were kidnapped and nearly froze to death. I think crying is pretty reasonable. She laughed, a broken, watery sound, and pulled the thermal blankets tighter. Your coat saved my life. You already said that. I know. But I need you to understand. She looked up at him, her hazel eyes red-rimmed but fierce. I need you to know that I know what you did, what you risked. You could have died, but I didn't, because my father got here in time. But if he hadn't, her voice cracked, you would have frozen to death standing there with me, and it would have been my fault. Caleb leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Zoe, listen to me. Nothing that happened tonight was your fault. Not the kidnapping, not the cold, not the choice I made to help you. Those men, they're responsible, not you. Everyone's going to say I was stupid, that I should have screamed, should have fought harder, Everyone can go to hell. The words came out harder than he intended, but Caleb didn't take them back. You survived. You escaped from armed men, ran through a forest in a storm, and stayed alive long enough for help to arrive. That's not stupid. That's incredible. Zoe stared at him, tears spilling over again, but this time she was smiling through them. You don't even know me. I know enough. The door opened, and Sebastian returned, his phone in his hand and his expression carved from ice. Whatever warmth had existed in the previous conversation was gone, replaced by something cold and purposeful. Zoe, mija, I need to ask you some questions. He sat across from her, his voice gentle despite the hardness in his eyes. Can you do that for me? She nodded, straightening slightly. Did any of them hurt you? Touch you inappropriately? Anything beyond the zip ties? No. Zoe swallowed hard. They kept arguing about keeping me undamaged. Said you needed to see me in one piece for proof of life. One of them Ricky wanted to, but the others stopped him. Said it wasn't part of the deal. Sebastian's jaw clenched so hard Caleb heard his teeth grind. Good, that's good, mija. He reached out and took her hand carefully, mindful of the IV. Did they say anything about who hired them? Any names? Locations? They mentioned someone in Seattle. A businessman. They said he'd pay them $50,000 when you agreed to some kind of deal. Zoe's brow furrowed, thinking, the warehouse, they kept saying, the warehouse on 5th. I don't know which city. I do. Sebastian's voice was soft, deadly. You did well, Mija. Rest now. The medic wants to take you to the hospital for observation. I don't want to go to a hospital. I want to go home. After the hospital, I promise. He kissed her forehead, a gesture so tender it seemed at odds with everything else about him. I have some business to finish here first. He stood and gestured for Caleb to follow. They stepped out into the snow again, and Caleb noticed that more vehicles had arrived, 3 additional SUVs, their occupants already spreading through the forest with tactical precision. What's happening? Caleb asked. Justice. Sebastian walked toward where his men had gathered near the tree line. The scarred man was waiting, along with 2 others who looked like they'd been carved from the same dangerous stone. Status? All 3 secured at secondary location. Paulson's location confirmed he's at his Seattle penthouse. Private security, but nothing we can't handle. The scarred man glanced at a tablet. Local police received an anonymous call about gunshots in this area. They're approximately 12 minutes out. Then we have 10 minutes to be gone. Sebastian turned to Caleb. This is where we part ways, unless you want to answer questions about why you were in the middle of a forest during a kidnapping recovery. Caleb understood. Whatever was about to happen, the fewer witnesses the better. You're going to kill them. It wasn't a question. No. Sebastian's answer surprised him. I'm going to give them a choice. They can disappear, leave the state, leave their lives, never speak of this again, or they can face what comes next. Most men, when confronted with the reality of their actions, choose survival over pride. And if they don't, then they made their choice. Sebastian held out his hand. Thank you, Caleb Scott, for my daughter's life, for your courage, for being the kind of man who does what's right even when it's hard. Caleb shook his hand, feeling the strength in that grip, the controlled power. What about the man in Seattle? Derek Paulson will wake up tomorrow with a very clear understanding of what happens to people who threaten my family. Sebastian's smile was arctic. But he'll wake up. I'm not a monster, regardless of what you might hear. I'm just a father who protects what's his. One of the men approached with Caleb's coat, the olive green one he'd wrapped around Zoe. It had been cleaned somehow. The snow brushed off, though it was still damp. Keep mine, Caleb said, starting to remove Sebastian's expensive coat. No. Consider it a gift. Sebastian helped him into his own coat, which was still cold but familiar. Though we both know a coat isn't sufficient payment for a life. I don't want payment. I know. Which is exactly why you'll receive it. Sebastian nodded to the scarred man. Drive him home. Make sure he gets inside safely. And Caleb, he paused. Expect to hear from me, soon. Before Caleb could respond, Zoe's voice called from the SUV. Wait. She'd opened the door despite the medic's protests, still wrapped in blankets, the IV pole somehow coming with her. She stumbled through the snow toward Caleb, moving like every step hurt but refusing to stop. When she reached him, she threw her arms around his neck, hugging him with desperate strength. Thank you, she whispered against his shoulder. Thank you for not leaving me. Caleb hugged her back, feeling her shake not from cold now, but from emotion too big to contain. You're welcome, he said simply. Sebastian watched them, his expression unreadable, and Caleb saw something shift behind those dark eyes. A decision being made, a debt being calculated. The medic retrieved Zoe, guiding her back to warmth and safety. Caleb watched her go, then followed the scarred man to a vehicle that would take him home. Behind them, in the darkness between trees, Sebastian Munoz made a phone call, and 3 men learned what it meant to touch something sacred. Caleb woke to sunlight streaming through his bedroom window and his uncle's voice calling from downstairs. Caleb, you got a visitor. He sat up too quickly, his body reminding him of yesterday's ordeal with a symphony of aches. His muscles were sore from the cold, his fingers still tender, and his throat felt raw. The digital clock on his nightstand read 10:47 a.m. He'd slept for almost 12 hours. The events of the previous night felt surreal in daylight. Had he really given his coat to a Mafia boss's daughter? Had Sebastian Munoz really stood in the snow discussing justice while men screamed in the darkness? Caleb, his uncle's voice came again, more insistent. He pulled on jeans and a hoodie, his movements stiff, and made his way downstairs. His uncle Robert Scott, 53, weathered by years of outdoor work, stood in the kitchen doorway with an expression Caleb had never seen before. Not anger, not worry, something closer to awe. There's a man here to see you, Robert said carefully. Says his name is Sebastian Munoz. Says you helped his daughter last night. Caleb's stomach dropped. Where is he? Living room. With 2 other men who look like they could bench press my truck. Robert studied his nephew. You want to tell me what you got mixed up in? I found a girl in the woods. She was dying from hypothermia. I helped her. Caleb met his uncle's eyes. That's all. Robert held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. That's what I figured. You're a good kid, Caleb. Just be careful. Men like that, they live in a different world than us. I know. Caleb walked into the living room and found Sebastian standing by the window, looking out at the snow-covered property. He wore a different suit today, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, and despite being in a modest cabin in the middle of nowhere, he somehow didn't look out of place. The 2 men with him were positioned near the door, alert but not threatening. Caleb. Sebastian turned, and his expression was softer than it had been in the forest. I hope I'm not intruding. No, sir. I mean, Caleb gestured vaguely. I wasn't expecting you. I should have called first. But some conversations are better had in person. Sebastian glanced at Robert, who was hovering protectively in the doorway. Mr. Scott, would you give us a moment? I promise your nephew is in no danger from me. Robert looked at Caleb, who nodded. I'll be in the kitchen, Robert said. Holler if you need me. When they were alone aside from the 2 guards, who might as well have been furniture for all the attention they showed, Sebastian gestured to the worn couch. Sit, please. You look like you're about to fall over. Caleb sat, and Sebastian took the chair across from him, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees in a posture that was almost casual. How are you feeling? Sebastian asked. Sore, tired, but okay. The medic said you were closer to hypothermia than I realized. Another 10 minutes and he stopped himself. But you survived. You both did. How's Zoe? Home, resting. The hospital cleared her after a few hours of observation. Mild hypothermia, some cuts and bruises, but nothing permanent. Sebastian's expression tightened. Thanks to you. Caleb didn't know what to say to that, so he waited. I came here for 2 reasons, Sebastian continued. First, to thank you properly. What you did last night, giving Zoe your coat, staying with her, calling me, there aren't words adequate for that kind of debt. You don't owe me anything. Yes, I do. The certainty in Sebastian's voice left no room for argument. And I always pay my debts, which brings me to the second reason I'm here. One of the guards stepped forward, placing a leather portfolio on the coffee table between them. Sebastian opened it, revealing documents that looked official and expensive. I've had my lawyers working since dawn, he said. I want to offer you something, Caleb. Not as payment, you can't put a price on a life, but as insurance, as protection. I don't understand. You're 17, senior in high school. What are your plans after graduation? Caleb hesitated. The question felt like a trap, though he couldn't figure out how. Community college. Probably. Uncle Robert's been setting aside money, but it's not much. I'll need to work. Save up for a 4-year school eventually. What if you didn't have to worry about money? Sebastian pulled out the first document. Full scholarship to any university in the country. I have. Connections. Your grades are good, I checked. And with the right recommendation letters, the right applications, you could go anywhere. Caleb stared at the paperwork. You're serious. Completely. And that's just the beginning. Sebastian pulled out more documents. I've also arranged for a trust fund enough to cover living expenses, books, anything you need. No strings attached. No obligation to work for me or my organization. This is yours, free and clear. I can't, why would you? Because my daughter is alive. Sebastian's voice cracked slightly, the first real emotion Caleb had heard from him. Because when I got that call last night, when I heard a stranger's voice telling me Zoe was hurt, I thought... He stopped, composed himself. I thought I'd lost her. And then I arrived and saw what you'd done. Saw you standing there, freezing to death yourself, refusing to leave her side. He leaned back, his control reassembled. I don't forget things like that, Caleb, and I don't leave debts unpaid. What about the men? Caleb asked quietly. The ones who took her. Gone. Sebastian's tone made clear that no further explanation would be coming. They'll never hurt anyone again. As for Derek Paulson, the businessman who ordered the kidnapping, he's currently negotiating the sale of all his Seattle properties at a significant loss. He'll be bankrupt by next month, and he knows exactly why. You destroyed him. I gave him the same choice he gave my daughter, suffer or disappear. Sebastian's smile was cold. He chose poorly. Caleb looked at the documents again, his mind racing. College, a real education, a future that didn't involve scraping by, working 3 jobs, wondering if he'd ever escape the cycle of poverty that had claimed his parents. "Why me?" he asked. "You could help anyone. Why does it matter so much?" Sebastian was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. "Because 20 years ago someone helped me when they didn't have to. A stranger who saw me bleeding in an alley and called for help instead of walking away. I never got to thank him, he was gone before I woke up. But I swore that if I ever had the chance, I'd pay that forward." He met Caleb's eyes. "You're that chance. I don't want to owe you. You won't. This isn't a transaction, Caleb. It's gratitude. Take it or don't, that's your choice. But know that my protection extends to you regardless. Anyone who comes after you comes after me. That's not negotiable." The weight of those words settled over Caleb like a mantle. Protection from Sebastian Munoz meant safety from threats Caleb couldn't even imagine. It also meant association with a world he'd only glimpsed in shadows. "Can I think about it?" he asked. "Of course. Take your time." Sebastian stood, and Caleb rose with him. "But Caleb, one more thing. Zoe wants to see you, to thank you herself, properly. Would you be willing to visit? Tomorrow, perhaps?" Caleb thought about the girl in the burgundy uniform, wrapped in his coat, fighting to stay alive. "Yeah, I'd like that." "Good." Sebastian extended his hand. "My driver will pick you up at 2, and Caleb, thank you for giving me my daughter back." They shook, and then Sebastian was gone, his guards following like shadows. Robert appeared immediately. What the hell was that about? Caleb sank back onto the couch, staring at the portfolio full of life-changing documents. "I think," he said slowly, "I just made a very powerful friend. Or a very dangerous one. Maybe both." The Munoz estate sat behind iron gates and manicured hedges that probably cost more to maintain than most people's houses. Caleb watched through the window as Sebastian's driver, a quiet man named Roman, who'd barely spoken during the 40-minute drive, guided the black sedan up a winding driveway lined with snow-dusted trees. The house itself was massive, but surprisingly understated. No gaudy columns or excessive displays of wealth, just clean lines, large windows, and the kind of architecture that whispered money rather than shouting it. Roman opened Caleb's door. "Mr. Munoz is waiting in the main living area, straight through the entrance. First door on your left." Caleb stepped out, feeling acutely aware of his worn jeans and second-hand jacket. He'd tried to dress nicely, had even let his uncle loan him a button-down shirt, but standing in front of a house that probably had more bathrooms than his cabin, had rooms made him feel like he'd walked onto the wrong movie. Set. The front door opened before he could knock. A woman stood there, late 30s, elegant in a simple black dress, with sharp eyes that assessed him in 2 seconds flat. "Caleb Scott?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm Patricia, Mr. Munoz's house manager. Please, come in." She stepped aside, revealing an entrance hall with marble floors and artwork that looked like it belonged in museums. "May I take your jacket?" Caleb handed it over, feeling even more exposed in just the button-down. Patricia smiled genuinely, not the fake hospitality smile, and gestured toward an arched doorway. "They're waiting for you." But Patricia had already disappeared with his jacket. Caleb walked through the doorway and stopped. The living room was huge, but comfortable leather furniture arranged around a fireplace, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking snow-covered gardens, and enough space that it didn't feel crowded despite having 6 people in it. Sebastian stood near the fireplace, talking quietly with an older woman who had Zoe's eyes and fierce expression. 2 of Sebastian's men, including the scarred one from the forest, stood near the windows with the practiced invisibility of professional bodyguards. And on the couch, wrapped in an oversized sweater and fuzzy socks, sat Zoe. She looked different in daylight. In her own home, her dark hair was pulled back in a loose bun, her face clean of yesterday's trauma, though Caleb could still see the faint bruising around her wrists and the exhaustion in her eyes. When she saw him, her face lit up with genuine happiness. "Caleb!" She started to stand, and the older woman, her mother, Caleb realized, touched her shoulder gently. "Carefully, Mija. You're still recovering." "I'm fine, Mama." But Zoe settled back down, gesturing for Caleb to sit across from her. "Come here. Sit, please." Sebastian turned, his expression warming slightly. "Caleb, thank you for coming. This is my wife, Isabella." Isabella Munoz studied Caleb with the intensity of someone who'd learned to read people for survival. Then, to his complete surprise, she crossed the room and hugged him a brief, fierce embrace that somehow conveyed more than words could. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for bringing our daughter home." When she stepped back, Caleb saw tears in her eyes that she didn't bother to hide. I did what anyone would do," Caleb managed. "No." Isabella's voice was firm. "You did what most people wouldn't. You sacrificed your own safety for a stranger. That's rare, and we will never forget it." She sat beside Zoe, her hand finding her daughter's, and Sebastian gestured for Caleb to sit in the armchair opposite them. "How are you feeling?" Zoe asked before anyone else could speak. "Sore, but okay. How about you?" "Same." She held up her wrists, showing the bandages. "Doctor said these will heal clean. No permanent damage. Everything else is just bruises and—" She paused, her voice dropping. "And stuff I'll work through. Zoe's starting therapy next week," Isabella said gently. "Dr. Morrison specializes in trauma recovery." "That's good." Caleb meant it. He'd seen what happened to people who tried to bury trauma instead of dealing with it. Zoe smiled weakly. "Mom's making me. But honestly, after everything, yeah, I probably need it." An awkward silence settled over the room. Caleb felt like he was drowning in unspoken gratitude and expectations he didn't understand. Sebastian must have sensed it because he cleared his throat. "Caleb, I assume you've had time to think about my offer?" "I have." Caleb looked at Sebastian, then at Isabella and Zoe. "And I appreciate it. More than you know. But I need to understand something first." "Go on. What do you want from me?" The question came out blunter than he intended. "You're offering to pay for college, setting up a trust fund, giving me protection. That's huge, life-changing. But nothing comes for free, so what's the catch?" Sebastian's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes that might have been approval. "No catch, no strings, no obligation to work for me or be part of my organization. You're free to live your life however you choose." "Then why?" "Because my daughter is alive." Sebastian's voice was steady, controlled. "Because you gave her your coat, knowing you might die from the cold. Because when you called me, you stayed with her despite knowing armed men were hunting her. You didn't calculate odds or worry about consequences. You just acted." He leaned forward slightly. "I've spent my life building power, Caleb. Creating networks, establishing control, ensuring my family's safety through strength and fear. But all of that, every dollar, every connection, every threat I've made, it couldn't save Zoe that night. You did, with nothing but a coat and courage." Isabella reached over and took Sebastian's hand, squeezing gently. "So yes," Sebastian continued, "I'm offering you everything I can think of. Education, financial security, protection. Not because I expect something in return, but because that's what you deserve. And because, if I didn't, I'd spend the rest of my life knowing I had the power to change your future and chose not to use it." Caleb felt his throat tighten. He'd grown up with nothing, parents dead before he was 10, raised by an uncle who worked himself to exhaustion just to keep them fed. The idea of not worrying about money, of going to a real university, of having opportunities instead of obstacles, it was almost too much to process. "What if I mess up?" he asked quietly. "What if I take all this and fail?" "Then you fail," Isabella said simply. "And you try again. That's what the support is for, Caleb. Not to guarantee success, but to give you the freedom to attempt it without fear of destruction if you stumble." Zoe had been quiet, watching him with those intense hazel eyes. Now she spoke, her voice soft but clear. "I kept your coat. I know you probably want it back, but I kept it. It's hanging in my closet. Sometimes I just look at it and remember that someone I didn't even know cared enough to save my life." She leaned forward, ignoring her mother's cautioning hand. "You gave me everything that night, Caleb. Your warmth, your protection, your willingness to die so I could live. This," she gestured around the room, "this is just my father trying to give you something back. It's not payment. It's not a transaction. It's what we can do. Please let us." Caleb looked at the three of them, this family that existed in a world so different from his own, yet who understood gratitude and debt with a clarity most people never learned. He thought about his uncle working double shifts, about community college classes in overcrowded rooms, about dreams he'd learned not to dream because they felt too impossible. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay, I'll accept. But," he met Sebastian's eyes, "I want to earn it. I'll go to college. I'll use the money for school and living expenses. But I want to work too. Something legitimate. Something that helps people. I'm not interested in easy money. Sebastian smiled, a real smile that transformed his face. I wouldn't expect anything less. In fact, I've already thought about that. He pulled out his phone, scrolling quickly. I fund several nonprofits, youth mentorship programs, wilderness survival education, search and rescue training. If you're interested, I can arrange internships, volunteer positions, whatever you want. I'd like that. Then it's settled. Sebastian stood, and everyone else rose with him. He extended his hand, and Caleb shook it, feeling the weight of everything changing in that single gesture. Welcome to the family, Caleb Scott. Not as an employee or an obligation, but as someone we're honored to know. Isabella hugged him again, longer this time. Zoe stood carefully, and when Caleb turned to her, she wrapped her arms around him with surprising strength. Thank you, she whispered against his shoulder, just like she had in the forest. For everything. You're welcome, he said, and meant it completely. When she stepped back, she was crying again, but this time she was smiling too. The return to school felt surreal. Caleb walked through the halls of Pinewood High on Monday morning, carrying the same worn backpack, wearing the same thrift store clothes, looking exactly like he had the previous week. But everything had changed. He could feel it in the weight of Sebastian's business card in his wallet, in the bank account number written on official letterhead sitting in his uncle's safe, in the knowledge that 3 men had vanished from the world because they'd touched the wrong girl. He'd saved a life, and in doing so, had somehow saved his own. His uncle had been quiet during breakfast, watching Caleb with an expression caught between pride and worry. Finally, as Caleb was heading out the door, Robert had spoken. You're a good kid, Caleb, better than most. But men like Sebastian Munoz, they operate in a world where favors become chains and gratitude becomes leverage. Just keep your eyes open, okay? I will. And if anything feels wrong, if they ask for something that crosses a line, you walk away. Scholarship or not, you walk away. Caleb had promised, and meant it. But as he navigated the crowded hallways, he wondered if walking away was even possible anymore. Sebastian had said there were no strings, no obligations, but debt was debt, even when paid willingly. Caleb, he turned to find Emma Chen, a girl from his English class, jogging to catch up. She was breathless, her eyes wide with something between curiosity and concern. Is it true? She asked without preamble. About you and Zoe Munoz? Caleb's stomach dropped. What did you hear? That you found her in the woods, that she'd been kidnapped, that you saved her life. Emma lowered her voice, glancing around at the other students who were definitely not pretending to ignore them. People are saying her father is like connected, Mafia or something. Is that true? I don't know what her father does, Caleb said carefully. I just found someone who needed help and helped them. That's all. That's all? Emma's eyebrows rose. Caleb, there are rumors that 3 guys disappeared, that the FBI is involved, that... Emma. Caleb kept his voice level, calm. I found a girl dying from hypothermia. I gave her my coat and called her father. Everything else is just rumors. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay. People are talking, and some of them are saying you're in over your head, that you should be careful. I appreciate the concern, but I'm fine. Emma didn't look convinced, but she let it drop. Well, if you need anything, if things get weird, you can talk to me, okay? No judgment. Thanks. She walked away, and Caleb continued toward his locker, feeling the weight of too many eyes tracking his movement. Word had spread faster than he'd anticipated. Of course it had a kidnapping, a rescue, a Mafia connection. That was the kind of story that traveled through high school like wildfire. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. People talking about you. Ignore them. You did nothing wrong. Z. Zoe. She must have gotten his number from her father. Caleb smiled despite himself and typed back. Easier said than done, but I'm managing. Her response came immediately. Want to get coffee after school? I could use a friend who isn't asking me a million questions about what happened. Caleb hesitated. Being seen with Zoe would only fuel the rumors, make the connection between him and the Munoz family more visible. But she was reaching out, probably feeling just as isolated as he was, trapped by everyone's expectations and assumptions. Sure. Where? The grind. 4 p.m. I'll have my driver drop me. Of course she would. Because girls like Zoe Munoz didn't take the bus or walk home like normal teenagers. They had drivers and bodyguards and lives that existed in a completely different atmosphere. Caleb put his phone away and opened his locker, finding a note taped to the inside. Stay away from the Munoz family. You don't know what you're getting into. No signature, just a warning in careful block letters. He crumpled the note and threw it away, but the unease lingered. Someone was watching. Someone cared enough about his association with Sebastian to leave anonymous warnings. The day crawled by. Teachers who'd never noticed him before suddenly knew his name. Students whispered when he passed. By lunch, Caleb had retreated to the library, hiding in the stacks with a book he wasn't reading, just needing space from the constant attention. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Sebastian. "I understand there's been talk at your school. If it becomes a problem, let me know. I can arrange a transfer, private school, whatever you need." Caleb stared at the text. The offer was generous and probably necessary, given how quickly things were escalating. But transferring schools felt like running, felt like admitting he couldn't handle the consequences of his own choices. "I'll handle it. But thank you. The offer stands. And Caleb, you're under my protection now. Anyone who threatens you threatens my family. Remember that." The words should have been comforting. Instead, they felt like a weight settling over his shoulders. Protection meant safety, yes, but it also meant association, visibility, becoming part of something larger and more dangerous than he'd intended. By the time school ended, Caleb was exhausted from the attention, the whispers, the careful distance most students maintained. He walked to the grind, a coffee shop 3 blocks from school, and arrived 10 minutes early. Zoe was already there. She sat in a corner booth, wearing jeans and an oversized hoodie, her hair hidden under a baseball cap. 2 men in suits sat at separate tables nearby, not looking at her but clearly watching everything around her. Bodyguards, Caleb realized. "Of course." "Hey," Zoe said as he slid into the seat across from her. "Thanks for coming. Thanks for texting. Today was awful." She smiled weakly. "Yeah, same here. I went to a different school, but word travels fast. Everyone knows. Everyone's staring. Everyone wants details I can't give them. Did your parents pull you out?" "Almost, but I convinced them to let me try one more day." She wrapped her hands around a coffee mug that looked untouched. "I can't hide forever, right? Eventually I have to face people and just live." "Yeah." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. 2 people who'd survived something terrible together and now had to figure out how to exist in the aftermath. "My therapist says I should talk about it," Zoe said quietly. "About what happened, about how I feel. But every time I try, I see their faces. I feel the zip ties cutting into my skin. I remember thinking I was going to die in that forest. But you didn't. Because of you." She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. "And now everyone treats me like I'm broken, like I'm fragile. My parents barely let me out of their sight. My friends don't know what to say. And the rumors, God, the rumors about what they did to me. Ignore them," Caleb said firmly. "People will talk regardless. All that matters is what actually happened, and you know the truth." "Do I?" Zoe's voice cracked. "Because sometimes I wonder if I could have fought harder, if I could have escaped sooner. If I..." "Stop." Caleb leaned forward. "You survived. That's what matters. Everything else is just noise." Zoe stared at him, then laughed a broken, grateful sound. "How are you so calm about all this?" "I'm not. I'm just good at pretending." "Well, teach me. Because I feel like I'm falling apart." They talked for an hour about school, about the stairs, about the weight of everyone's expectations. Zoe's bodyguards remained vigilant but invisible. Other customers came and went, some recognizing Zoe, others just seeing 2 teenagers drinking coffee. When Caleb finally left, walking back toward where Roman waited to drive him home, he felt something shift inside him. This was his life now connected to the Munoz family, protected by their power, changed by their gratitude. And despite everything, despite the warnings and the whispers and the weight of it all, he didn't regret a single choice. Spring arrived slowly, melting the snow that had nearly killed them both. Caleb stood in the parking lot of Pinewood High, acceptance letter in hand, staring at words that still didn't feel real. Stanford University. Full scholarship, housing included. Everything he'd ever dreamed of and never believed possible. His uncle had cried when they'd opened the letter together. Actually cried the first time Caleb had seen him break down since the funeral for Caleb's parents. "Your mom would be so proud," Robert had said, voice thick. So damn proud. Now, 3 months after that night in the forest, Caleb's life had transformed in ways he was still processing. The scholarship arranged through Sebastian's connections but earned through Caleb's own grades and essays. The internship with a wilderness survival nonprofit teaching inner-city kids basic outdoor skills. sharing knowledge that had saved Zoe's life, the respect from teachers who'd never noticed him before, the wariness from students who'd heard the rumors, and Zoe. Their friendship had deepened through shared trauma and genuine connection. She'd returned to school after 2 weeks, walking through halls with her head high despite the whispers. Her therapy was helping. She'd told him that during their weekly coffee meetups, which had become routine, she was healing, slowly, painfully, but healing nonetheless. "Caleb!" He turned to find Zoe jogging across the parking lot, her burgundy and white cheerleading uniform bright in the afternoon sun. She'd rejoined the squad after spring break, determined not to let what happened define her. Some days were harder than others, but she was trying. "Did you hear?" She was breathless, excited. "I got into Northwestern. Early admission. That's amazing." Caleb hugged her, feeling her laugh against his shoulder. "Journalism program? Yeah. I'm going to tell stories that matter. Real ones. Not just what happened to me, but..." She pulled back, her eyes serious. "But stories about people who survive, who fight back, who refuse to be victims. You're going to be incredible. We both are." She looked at the acceptance letter in his hand. "Stanford?" He nodded, still somewhat dazed. "Caleb, that's God. That's perfect. You deserve this. You deserve all of it." She glanced around, then lowered her voice. "My dad wants to see you. Tonight if you can. He has something for you." "What kind of something?" "The good kind. Trust me." That evening, Roman drove Caleb to the Munoz estate for what felt like the 100th time. He'd become a regular visitor, family dinners, strategy sessions about college applications, quiet conversations with Sebastian about responsibility and power, and the weight of choices that changed lives. Isabella greeted him at the door with her usual warmth, ushering him into Sebastian's study, a room lined with books and artwork, and the subtle trappings of carefully accumulated power. Sebastian stood by the window, a glass of whiskey in hand, staring out at gardens that had transformed from frozen wasteland to spring beauty. He turned when Caleb entered, and his expression was softer than Caleb had ever seen it. "Congratulations on Stanford," Sebastian said. "Well earned. Thank you for everything that made it possible. I made introductions. You did the work." Sebastian set down his glass and picked up a wooden box from his desk. "I wanted to give you something before you leave for California. Something that represents what you mean to this family." He opened the box, revealing a watch, elegant, expensive, but not ostentatious. The kind of timepiece that spoke of quality rather than flash. "It was my father's," Sebastian said quietly. "He gave it to me when I turned 18, told me that time was the only thing we couldn't buy back, so I should spend it wisely. I want you to have it." Caleb stared at the watch, understanding the weight of what was being offered. "I can't. This is a family heirloom. You are family." Sebastian's voice was firm. "Not by blood, but by something stronger. You gave me back my daughter. You showed me that power and money mean nothing if the people you love are gone. That's worth more than any watch, any favor, any debt I could ever repay." He lifted the watch from the box and held it out. "But this is for you. A reminder that your time is valuable, that the choices you make, the moments you spend helping others, they matter. They change worlds." Caleb took the watch with shaking hands, feeling the weight of history and gratitude and responsibility. "I don't know what to say. Say you'll remember what you learned that night. That courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. That character is defined by what you do when no one's watching, when there's no reward except knowing you did what was right." "I will. I promise." Sebastian smiled, and it transformed his face from dangerous to paternal. "Good. Now come." Isabella made dinner, and Zoe's been talking about your college plans all week. She's excited to have someone she trusts heading to the same coast. They walked to the dining room together, and Caleb felt the shift not from stranger to family member, exactly, but from rescued to equal, from debt to relationship, from transaction to trust. Dinner was loud, warm, filled with laughter and plans and the kind of casual affection that came from people who'd seen each other at their worst and chosen to stay anyway. Isabella told embarrassing stories about Sebastian's youth. Zoe talked about her plans for journalism, her determination to use her voice for good. Sebastian outlined the nonprofit work waiting for Caleb in California, connections with wilderness programs that needed young, passionate teachers. After dinner, Zoe pulled Caleb aside into the garden. The evening was cool, spring flowers blooming around them, and she wrapped her arms around herself against the chill. "I wanted to show you something," she said, leading him to a small garden bench hidden among the roses. There, Mounted on an elegant wooden stand was his coat, the olive green one he'd wrapped around her that night. It had been professionally cleaned, restored, preserved like the artifact it had become. "I told you I kept it," Zoe said softly. "But I wanted it to mean something more than just a memory of the worst night of my life. So I had them put it here, in the garden, where things grow." She touched the fabric gently. "This coat represents everything you gave me, Caleb. Warmth when I was freezing, protection when I was hunted, hope when I thought I was going to die. And it represents who you are. Someone who sacrifices without thinking, who helps without expecting reward." Tears slid down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "You saved my life, and I'm going to spend the rest of mine making sure that matters, making sure I do something worthy of the second chance you gave me." Caleb pulled her into a hug, feeling her shake with emotion and relief and gratitude too big for words. "You're already doing that," he murmured, "just by being here, by surviving, by choosing to live fully instead of letting fear win." They stood there in the garden as darkness fell, two people forever connected by the worst and best moments of their lives, bound not by debt but by understanding that sometimes, in the frozen darkness, one simple act of kindness could change everything. The coat hung between them, a reminder that violence could be survived, that character mattered more than power, and that the boy who gave his warmth to a dying girl had, in that single moment, saved far more than one life. He'd saved them both. Thanks for staying with this story, right till the final moment. You're the reason these stories come alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to see your thoughts and connect with you down there.
Родители, если есть, которые друзья поддержат тебя в какой-то момент, хотя бы просто отвлекут тебя от этих мыслей. А если у тебя, к примеру, там семья, жена, к примеру, да, есть дети, то тут, наверное, поддержка только от них исходит какая-то. Вот. Чтобы не упиваться в своих мыслях о том, что какая нынче сложная жизнь. И, наверное, других-то вариантов, в принципе-то, и нету. Какие вот еще варианты, в принципе, изменить, поменять свою жизнь настолько, чтобы она была, казалась тебе удачной, да, реализованным себя в жизни, в чем-то. Вот как проявляется на самом деле у нас реализованность? Наверное, у 90% случаев это финансовое благополучие, финансовая независимость. Это, наверное, одно из таких ключевых моментов, когда человек, наверное, считает себя реализованным, да, в этой жизни. То есть, как добиться этого? То есть, с учетом того, что даже возьмем нашу страну, да, сколько миллионов людей здесь живет, как каждому добиться этого результата? Непонятно. И с каждым годом просто ситуация становится все хуже и хуже. Все дорожает, люди зарабатывают либо столько же. Даже если они зарабатывают столько же, на самом деле этого все уже недостаточно. К чему это все приведет на самом деле? В оконцове, наверное, мир погрязнет в большую депрессию в какую-то. Какие-то войны, возможно, или еще что-то еще больше глобальных таких вещей, которые не приведут ни к чему хорошему на самом деле. Поддержка каждого человека именно для того, чтобы он держался, наверное, морально, заключается в том, что, наверное, дом, в который ты приходишь, должен быть крепостью твоей, да, что это единственное должно быть место, где ты будешь чувствовать себя под защитой. Для этого было придумано, наверное, своя пещера изначально, потом свои какие-то чумы, палатки различные, да, потом все это превратилось. На данный момент это у нас дома, квартиры, в которые мы приходим и должны ощущать себя в безопасности, чтобы можно немного морально расслабленным с учетом того, что ты выходишь каждый день на работу, на улицу, и все равно давление вот это вот, оно все равно присутствует. Когда ты заходишь в магазин, видишь цены эти, да, и так далее, не можешь себе что-то там приобрести, позволить на ежедневной основе, это откладывает большой, наверное, отпечаток. Не, наверное, а точно. И поэтому, когда возвращаясь домой, ты чувствуешь, вот хотя бы есть типа уголок того места, куда ты можешь прийти. Уголок на самом деле человеку много тоже не надо. Можно хотеть большего, но на самом деле человеку одному много не надо. Да? Ему нужно спальное место, спокойное место, где можно подумать. Ну, это когда ты один, к примеру, да? Когда у тебя есть семья, к примеру, ты приходишь домой, опять-таки, тут хотя бы, да, поговорить о каких-то вещах. Просто об отрешенных вещах, наверное. И, возможно, при этих же условиях у тебя и появляется какая-то дополнительная мотивация для реализации себя. А когда у тебя нету ничего, вот это уже становится проблемой. И это у многих на самом деле. Что значит не иметь ничего? Тут, наверное, самое главное, дизмораль у человека еще возникает при том, что это уже, наверное, где-то в глубине души даже она возникает при даже хорошей финансовой подушке такой, которая у тебя есть, хороших финансовых деньгах, да, то есть, но нету вот внутреннего ощущения, к примеру, дружбы, семьи, любви и так далее. Это уже отдельно на самом деле разговор, потому что мы, вот, к примеру, можем взять, как сейчас вот Новстрой, если кто-то смотрит, насколько тяжело обладать такими финансами и не иметь, по сути, ничего. Ни друзей, ничего не иметь. Так главное, это получается для бедных главное деньги, для богатых главное какое-то внутреннее ощущение нужности, не из-за денег. Вот такое вот. И это борьба какая-то такая и вот эти два слоя общества, богатые и бедные, они друг друга не понимают. На самом деле из-за этого, возможно. Потому что богатый человек, он уже не смотрит на деньги, он не считает эти деньги. Ему важно внутреннее вот это вот ощущение того, что он нужен без них даже. Это как Тони Старку сказали: а кто ты без костюма? Она вот это, я филантроп, тудым-сюдым, он сказал, да? Так и человеку, у которого много денег, ты задашь вопрос: а кто ты без денег? Ну, что ты представляешь себе без денег? Вот и это, наверное, возможно, таких людей богатых, как вот, например, там Новстрой, задав ему этот вопрос: а кто ты без денег? Он на него ответить-то и не сможет. Обратная сторона людей бедных, да, вот если мы посмотрим, человеку